name is Floudopoulos. I'm a journalist from Capital.gr, and I have the honor to moderate the next panel under the title Energy Platform, Critical Raw Materials Batteries. We have with us the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Maroš Šefčovič. Hello. Mr. Kostas Skrekas, Minister of Environment and Energy of the Hellenic Republic. Hello, Minister. Ms. Burce Warlick, Deputy Executive Director of International Energy Agency from France. Mr. Christos Balaskas, Vice President and General Manager of Greece Eldorado Gold Greece. Ms. Asimakopoulou, Member of the European Parliament. Hello. And Mr. Robbie Diamond, President and CEO of SAVE United States. Hello. So, let me start with posing the same question to the panel. In the context of energy transition, what is the role of critical minerals? Is there a risk of creating for the EU a new dependence on the important critical raw materials necessary for technologies such as batteries? What needs to change in the EU strategies regarding the mining industry so that we do not have the repeat of the natural gas problem with Russia? Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I really would like to thank the organizer for the kind invitation, because I'm also responsible for the foresight. So it's nice to come to the place where all that started with the oracle from Delphi, because here I understand they've been doing already many thousand years ago the prediction how it would be for the future. And I think our discussion is kind of also reflecting the lessons learned of the past and what needs to be done in the future. When I started in 2017 with the European Battery Alliance to make sure that our automotive and energy industries are better prepared for all these new transformational changes which are taking place right now, it was quite clear that if you want to continue to make high quality cars in Europe and make sure that we would have enough storage capacity for our renewable energy, we need to be very strong in battery segment. And at that time we've been nowhere. Working closely with the industry help us in a very short period of time to have more than 190 billion euros of private investment into this sector, more than 160 industrial projects, and currently we are building across Europe more than 30 gigafactories. And that's all good. But what was another lesson we very quickly learned, that we are super dependent on the critical raw materials. And that without proper critical raw materials, we cannot build nor green nor digital economy, and that simply, as we learned with the war in Ukraine and our dependency on Russian fossil fuels spending over so many years, that dependencies are very costly, they are very dangerous, and that we should speak today about economic security, because this is part of the whole picture. So what it's very clearly one of the top priorities in the European Union is the fact that we need to do much more in securing the proper supply of critical raw materials to Europe. As I would say anecdotal evidence, I would highlight that in 2017 lithium was not even on the list of critical raw materials of the European Union. And very quickly we realized that by 2050 we might need up to 60 times more, 60, than what we've been consuming, in these times. And therefore, the story about lithium, it's very much similar about cobalt, and the list of 30 critical raw materials we put on the list, and which we are looking forward to acquire in Europe. So how we are reacting to this challenge, and I know that to a great extent is the same challenge for our American partners, for G7 countries, and we just simply need to coordinate our actions and work together. We just adopted Critical Raw Materials Act, where we want to proceed in several directions. The first one is to really map out what we have in Europe, and we have a lot, and to have a list of strategic projects where we can direct our political attention and direct also the financial supports to develop these deposits in European countries. We have actually a lot of deposits in our neighborhood. I personally signed structural agreement on critical raw materials with Ukraine before the war started, because Ukraine has everything what we need. There is a lot in Serbia, there is a lot in countries of Western Balkans, there is a lot in Northern Africa, and of course our Scandinavian countries, they have a lot of deposits and also top quality know-how how to mine and extract and process critical raw materials in a sustainable way. Of course, we might not get everything from Europe and from our neighborhood. We still would need to get some supplies from the third countries, and therefore what is very important and part of our strategy is to have solid chapters on critical raw materials in our new trade agreements. We are increasing our critical raw materials diplomacy, and I think that it would be clearly the part of our efforts. And I think some of the investments could be so politically challenging and so financially intensive that we might need also the collaboration of our partners in G7. Last thing what I would say, because I know that we have a lot of experience around the table and I do not want to go over my time, what paid off when we needed to do something very quickly, like with batteries, like with common purchase of gas, is if you need to work fast, work closely with the industry. They have experience, they will tell you what needs to be done, and then use all the possibilities of the public office, of the public support to make it happen fast, and to make it done in a fair way for the consumers, so the European economy and European consumers can benefit from them. Clearly, the critical raw materials, the dependencies which been developed over the last time are now part of what must be very thorough reflection in European Union about economic security, and we have to pay utmost political attention to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Skrekas, the same question also, how can Greece also contribute to the goal for Europe to become sufficient towards the goals for critical materials?
Well, Europe has paid a very high price because of its dependence on Russian gas, and Greece has paid a very high price. In 2022, we have paid almost 5% of our GDP in order to pay the gas which has been imported and used for electricity generation mainly. So what we have decided in Greece is to reduce our dependence on very expensive imported fossil fuels. To give you an example, we have increased almost 10 times the deployment of renewables on an annual basis. All 4 years between 2015 and 2018, we were building and connecting to the grid almost 200 megawatts on an annual basis. In 2022, we have deployed almost 2,000 megawatts. So just in 1 year, we have connected to the grid almost twice the capacity of the whole 4 years between 2015 and 2018. So currently, almost 50% of the electricity consumption is being generated from renewables. And our target is that 80% of our electricity consumption will come from renewables by 2030. And in order to achieve this very ambitious target, we have to deploy 24 gigawatts of renewables. In fact, to be correct, 15 gigawatts, because we have already 10 gigawatts constructed, so we have to build another 15 gigawatts, but also we need to develop, to establish almost 8 gigawatts of storage capacity. 70% of that is going to be batteries. 30% is going to come from hydropumping storage systems. So in 2023, we have estimated that we should build, or we should start building almost 1 gigawatt of batteries. So now the next question comes, from where are we importing those equipment from? Mainly from China. And this is something that we have to take care of, because Europe shouldn't make the same mistake twice. Here in Greece, we have critical raw material, which are very critical, of course. So we have nickel, and you know that lithium batteries contain a lot of nickel. We have cobalt, we have magnesium, we have other critical raw materials that we should exploit. Very recently, we have managed to privatize a former state-owned company called Larco. Larco was one of the largest producers of steel nickel. Now the new buyer, the new investor, is going to change the production technique in order to produce nickel that can be used for batteries and for other uses. This is something that all European member states should do. So we have, on one hand, to protect and preserve the environment, but on the other hand, we have to be very practical, we have to be very logical, and utilize the raw material that Europe has.
Thank you very much. So let me come to International Energy Agency. What are your projections for the raw material needs in the process of energy transition, and how can we cope with the projected needs?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm happy to share with you some of our analysis. I think there's no question. I think it's increasingly recognized that the world really needs to ensure a diversified supply chain of critical minerals to sustain the energy transition. Our projections show that demand for critical minerals for the clean energy technologies are going to quadruple. So by 2050, this is according to our climate-driven scenario. So the demand is going to do nothing but grow. Just in one sector alone, our global electric vehicles outlook, which was launched by the IEA just a couple of weeks ago, shows that there's really strong growth in the electric vehicles area. For example, by this year, in 2023, we're estimating that 18% of car vehicles will be electric vehicles. This is going to be 35% growth above last year. And electric vehicles will represent 60% of car sales in China, the EU, and the US by 2030. So this in turn means huge demand for batteries, and that in turn is going to require significant critical minerals. And this is clearly an energy security challenge that we need to be thinking about going forward. I know for Greece too that your anticipated projected scale up in electric mobility and electric vehicles is also going to require, as you just mentioned, Minister, increased demand for critical raw materials. And so it's really an important issue for countries all around the world to be thinking about. IEA analysis shows how mining, processing, and manufacturing of the critical minerals is highly concentrated geographically. And so this is a concern. It's something that our Energy Technology Perspectives report that was issued earlier this year showed quite strongly. There's one country, and that country was already mentioned, that accounts for over half of global production of several key minerals, both for production and for processing. And so this is a challenge that the world really needs to come to terms with. This is one of the slides from that report, and it's been very well publicized, I think, but you can see that in terms of critical minerals production and processing and then technology manufacturing, China is really the biggest producer. And so in energy security terms, it's really important for countries to start thinking about how to identify ways for securing diversified supply chain of critical minerals. And just a few recommendations. we would have. One is to really fast-track project development, and this is going to mean raising public awareness of the importance of these minerals and metals in the energy transition, and so issues related to permitting and such are going to be really important. Second, we think it's going to be very important for countries to work with international partners that they can rely upon. No country is an island, and we'll need to be looking not at sort of the self-sufficiency sort of solutions, but really at international and multilateral solutions as well. Third, there needs to be a continued strong push for technology innovation, and this is going to require a commitment on countries as well. We have some of the technologies needed to drive forward the clean energy transition, but not nearly all of them yet. And of course, we need a level playing field when it comes to ESG standards, which is an important component. And then the last one we'd mentioned, though this is not necessarily a complete set of recommendations, is on the importance of critical minerals recycling and looking at that as a way of ensuring that we're really using these resources in a responsible and the best practices kind of way. So multilateral engagement, as I said, and cooperation is going to be so important. This set of issues has attracted a lot of attention, including most recently at the G7 Energy Ministerial meeting in Sapporo, which just took place. So, you know, issues related to recycling and innovation and forecasting long-term supply and demand issues and developing these resources in a responsible way are all very important. Last point I would mention, this issue has really risen to the top of the IEA members' attention, and it is an important part of the work that we're doing. And in that connection, we are looking at hosting a high-level, ministers-level meeting at the end of September this year, specifically to come up with and look at come up with recommendations on ways to ensure reliable and sustainable mineral supplies going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Balaskas, you represent the industry. So what problems, what are the challenges for a mining company operating in Europe with heavy regulation and the heavy standards? And what needs to be changed in order to have endogenous production of minerals?
This is I think, a long discussion, but I'll try to contain it in 4 to 8 minutes. First of all, I'd like to say that before the Critical Raw Materials Act initiative, mining generally in Europe, it was the poor relative. It was not addressed. I think now the events of the pandemic and the geopolitical struggles in Europe with Russian-Ukrainian war brought it to the forefront. And especially as we start thinking how we will move and build the electricity-driven clean energy and transition, and also achieve net zero economy, and at the same time achieve the very ambitious neutrality goals of EU, raw materials and mining came again to the forefront. So we need to address it. We need to address the security of supply. We need to address also the huge gap that you mentioned about supply and demand, and actually produced as much as we can in Europe. Explore Europe because it's underexplored. Change the legislation to allow exploration in Europe. Also make it so that the permitting process is also in Greece, but in Europe, and to be really more efficient, more effective, in a shorter time frame without making any rebates on social and environmental control. To do it in a most sustainable way. This is vitally important, and that's what we're trying to do also with Eldorado Gold and Hellas Gold in Greece. I may want to inform the audience what I believe, at least, and I have in my list as raw materials, critical raw materials. I read from the list. It's aluminium, it's cobalt, it's lithium, it's nickel, silver, zinc. Copper, of course, is my favorite one because it's that we have in Skourias project in North Greece in Chalkidiki. The gap of copper production in 10 years' time, it will be probably around 20 million tons, where the global production is currently 20 million tons. So you can imagine this is huge. So changes in the permitting framework, faster. But last and not least, it's fostering the license to operate legally, politically, and changing this approach that it has been widely accepted in Europe in the past, that we shouldn't be doing mining in our own, not in our backyard. Let's change it. We want EU, we want the Greek state to update, to educate, to communicate with the public so that the reputation of mining is restored. Now, in our case, maybe it's worth repeating that there is a critical raw material to be produced in Greece, in Skourias project, 780,000 tons proven reserves, and this will bring a lot of jobs, 5,000 direct and indirect jobs in the local communities, $2 billion revenues for the Greek state, $4 billion US dollars revenues in procurement, and at the same time it will allow and give us the opportunity to invest $80 million US dollars in the corporate social responsibility projects. Things like that do not happen easily, and these are in mining foreign direct investments. They're not investments in shares in the stock exchange. This is the real economy, and that's where we need the support from the EU, where mining projects are included in projects of common interest. This is vitally important, and also to include it at the same time as project of importance of overriding public interest. This is something that we need to be seeing more and more in order to address the security supply that we currently have.
Thank you very much. So one of the main critical materials is aluminium, and Mrs. Asimakopoulou, you have studied a lot regarding the Europe's aluminium industry that you can talk about us.
Happy to, thank you. First of all, let me just say it's a great honor to be on this distinguished panel. I think the oracle in Delphi, Vice President, used to answer, existential questions. Will your son or your husband come back from war alive or wounded? I think, though, if we ask the oracle about critical raw materials or batteries, which you are the king of batteries in the European Union, we all know that. I think if we ask the oracle, there would be no question what the answer would be about how critical raw materials are, based on the data for demand, but also based on our priorities. As you mentioned, I have been a, let's say, prominent voice on the European stage for aluminium. Why is that? The Honorable Minister mentioned that in Greece we have nickel, we have cobalt, but we have a great production of aluminium. In fact, in the European Union, we've talked about our dependency on China for critical raw materials. 60% of all production of aluminium is done in China. 30% of European aluminium production has decreased since, I think, 2008. And with the energy crisis and the high electricity prices, 50% of Europe's capacity at the moment has gone offline. So I don't think I need to, it doesn't take an oracle from Delphi to see that our aluminium industry is going through a hard time. What does it need? It needs to be included in this Critical Raw Materials Act, which I agree. I think that the big taboo of mining has, finally bust. So I'm delighted that mining is addressed in the Critical Raw Materials Act, and I agree with the points that you made as industry. But we have to have aluminum on the critical raw materials list, and I do hope that we'll have some champions of this also in the Commission. Certainly, I will be leading the charge on this in Parliament. But the other issue that these industries are facing has to do with the high electricity prices. Now, I know we're going to redo the electricity market in the European Union, and in fact, the minister and Mr. Mitsotakis have been, let's say, champions and front runners in some very good ideas about how to do that. But in the meantime, we have this proposal for green pooling. These are these power purchase agreements and how they're shared and how they can help decrease the firming costs with respect to renewables in the mix for energy production. And this is in front of the Commission, and we could have some movement on that. So I'm hoping that we'll see that and that that'll be good for Greece. I'll close by saying critical raw materials were something we've discussed in the context mostly of industrial policy and competitiveness of Europe. In fact, I think everybody on this panel will agree that now it's actually a question of our security in Europe. It's not just about industrial competitiveness. So I'm delighted that there are so many powerful figures behind this in Europe and also in the United States. And that's why here we go. We have our transatlantic voice who understands this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Give me a great pass for Mr. Diamond. So what does the United States, what do they do in the United States in order to help the industry and to avoid the possible dependence from China?
Right. First of all, thanks for having me. As I like to say, we can't go from dependence from the Saudi frying pan into the Beijing battery fire, and that's really what we see going on. Many people have mentioned Delphi and Greeks. I did a little tabulation. We've used 700 million tons of metals since 400 BCE, and we now till 2020, and we now predict we'll need another 700 million tons between 2020 and 2040. So that is just the scope of what we're talking about here. And the United States has the same problems as Europe with permitting and everything else. You heard we don't want it not in my backyard, which is called NIMBY. We now have a new movement called YIMBY, yes in my backyard, and we're trying to get that a little bit more. So, I also before just saying one more thing about the United States and what they're doing. I think we're talking a lot about energy systems, but I also have to talk about weapon systems and platforms and our national defense. So at the same time, what we've discovered in this Ukrainian war is that our militaries are not capable of keeping pace at the amount of munitions that they're using, don't know how to rebuild those. Remember, World War II was won by what they called the arsenal of democracy, right? This amazing flow of oil and goods coming. And all the things that are in an F-35 airplane or any other weapon system is the exact same thing you find in an electric car. They're all based on the periodic table. So it's really important to think about that need as well. Look, the United States created this IRA, this Inflation Reduction Act, caused a lot of brouhaha. I would say that, as it was stated, in Europe, a little bit, they tried to tell people what to do. In America, Senator Manchin just decided to try to bribe people what to do. And handing out, over $1 trillion, it will be much higher than that at the end, is something that they have done. They have not been willing to regulate in many cases, but rather to stimulate the economy. I personally think that's important that they don't just look at what were called free trade countries. Europe is not one. Now they're going to create, I hope, a new free trade agreement, with the United States just on this issue. Because in the end of the day, we have to have a global race to the top, and that can only be done with the allies. Because China, which was mentioned before, will always beat us on price. Because they can hide the economic and environmental costs. So for example, in a rare earth materials mine, the processing pond in China is actually radioactive, and most of the people in some of those cities are dead. And we just can't do that. So unless we have absolute transparency in our supply chains and each live to the same standards, in the end, we'll be fighting and have a race to the bottom. And I think this is the moment for the battery passport to be adopted, you know, in the United States and Canada and Australia and Taiwan and South Korea and Japan. I think we have a larger industry and car industry. So there's a great opportunity also to work together on the global south. We all spend more money going to the global south than even China's Belt and Road. So I just think it's a moment where we all have to stand together and have that strong transatlantic relationship. And I also just wanted to say the word processing. You know, we talk about where the rocks come from, and we did hear about that, but it is just critical that the processing is part of it. It's this entire supply chain: mining, processing, precursor materials, and the final manufacturing. And many environmental you know, groups, and we should do all this, but you know, they say we should recycle it. Well, we should recycle everything, but we have to first get the materials. We should get them in a clean, ethical way, and then we should continue to recycle them, and then we can have that sustainable economy. So I think there's a lot of focus in the United States on it, and but now is the time to work together.
Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. The time is over. Thank you very much for participating in a very interesting discussion.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.